Hey Akshay,
How you doing?
doing well.
What are we talking about today?
I think we should talk about how do you build your requirements and evaluate vendors when you're looking for a visibility solution.
Yeah, so just to give a little brief introduction, we are co-founders of Terminal 49, and we're just having casual conversations about, how our customers use Terminal 49, how people in the industry work with a visibility provider, everything and anything related to global trade, but mostly focused on moving shipping containers. All right. So, how to evaluate visibility providers? How do you think about that? And I guess what are the questions that we should be thinking about?
I think it depends who you are. So let's say you're working with a BCO and you're asked to find a visibility provider. As a BCO, like how would you think about building requirements and evaluating a solution?
Yeah. So So I think like that's a good place to focus. A BCO, a beneficial cargo owner, typically defined as people who are importing goods into a country, or could be even exporting goods, but it's the goods that they care about. Companies like Wayfair, Amazon, Procter and Gamble, construction equipment companies. So let's say you're a BCO and you're someone who works at a BCO and you're tasked with finding a visibility provider, right? How should you think about building a set of requirements to evaluate the providers that are out there? I think the first thing I would do if I was being tasked to find a solution is clearly there's a reason why we should be using a visibility provider. So what does the current world look like, and what are the pain points with how we're operating as a BCO, especially I'm sure from the context of the operations team, right? And in no specific order, I think one should write down, it's like, okay, well, what does my supply chain look like? Starting with like number of containers that we're managing on an annual basis, um, on a monthly basis. Which locations are we importing into and exporting out of? Right?
Mhm.
Is it into the US only? Is it North America? Is it also Europe? Is it global? Right? What's the scope of the problem? And who is currently involved in the team and across the company that needs to track containers? And why is that? Right? Clearly, the operations team at most BCOs that work anything related to logistics of the supply chain usually needs to know what's happening with the shipping container, right? And I would go around and ask your team, what do they do today? Most of the time, the answer is going to be people are tracking things on the carrier websites. They are asking their brokers and or the trucking companies they work with, what's happening at the terminal, when things are being scheduled to get picked up, when things are being scheduled to get delivered,
Mhm.
and roughly estimate how much time each and every person is spending doing this work. From our conversations, we've seen each individual that's managing shipping containers spending 4 to 8 hours a week just tracking shipping containers, especially when there's hundreds of containers
Mhm.
a month or any given time that they're tracking. And you know, where are you currently tracking these things? Right? Are people doing it on their own and taking notes, and storing the status in their own world? Is there a shared spreadsheet? Do you have an ERP system? Right? When people track this, how does that information disseminate internally, or even if it does, do you want it to happen? And so I think you have to figure out, what is the world that you want, that you are in, and where do you want it to go? We think as an opinion is like people should not be tracking containers manually, right? So that's like an opinion. The other is everybody who needs to know within the organization, which is definitely the supply chain team, they should get access to the real time status of the container, so everybody's on the same page.
Okay, let me pause you. So once you've talked to everyone in your team, you found out current processes, you've decided how it is you want to use data within your organization. And now you kind of have some requirements or some feel for where you are now and where you want to get to. How do you then take that and take the next step and start researching and evaluating potential solutions?
Yeah. So I think kind of having some level of clarity on, what's your supply chain, how many containers you need to track, where do you want the information? Hey, you might want a dashboard to look at everything. You might want to integrate the data into your system. You might want both, right? The coverage is important because it helps you evaluate the visibility providers. Hey, I only want visibility for things coming into the US. I want visibility for things going out of China and US, and I want visibility coming for everything coming into. I manage my own trucking, so I also need to know what's happening at the terminal, to manage demurrage or per diem. I have a lot of demurrage and per diem. How do I reduce it? Right? So this will help you narrow down your visibility providers, because the reality of the visibility providers is everybody might say they track shipping containers, but it's nuanced on the coverage that they provide. Do they track the container continuously across all modes, right?
Mm.
Many visibility providers might just provide ocean carrier data, but they might not provide data from what's happening at the terminal. They might not provide data for what's happening when the container's on rail. They might not provide the vessel location when the container is on the water. So, not everybody is the same. And how they provide you the data is also vary. Some people might just provide the data via a dashboard. Some provide it only via an API. Some provide both. And so you want to make a list of it. And then that's where it becomes a little bit more qualitative evaluation. A little bit of a checklist. Make a checklist of all the carriers that you need coverage for. Make a checklist of all the features that you need. Do you want data from ocean? Do you want all milestones for all containers? Do you want milestones and the status from the terminals? Do you want to be able to see where the vessel is on a map? Do you want the rail milestones? Do you want to see the rail location on a map? Do you want to know when the last free day is of a container for pickup, last free days of containers to empty return a container? So make a list and go down, make different columns for each vendor and check off the boxes where it makes sense. So I think that is, that's the best way to objectively evaluate after you have a conversation with each vendor. So I think that's like level one, like who provides you what. So then I look at the concept of trust but verify. Like, how do you verify this?
Mm-hmm. Are
And
we going to
that's
have time
where,
to talk about that today? That's a big topic.
yeah. And so I think, verification is a whole evaluation trial. Many companies take different terms for how they think about this process. And there's different scope of this process.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does evaluation look like over a 2-day period, over a couple of hours? What does evaluation look like a week? And maybe you want to do a very in-depth evaluation over like 6 to 12 weeks because you're a large company and you want to make sure you pick the right provider. And we can talk about all of those things. Do you want to stop there?
I think we're at a natural breaking point before we go into the next big topic of phase 2 once you make that short list.